And welcome to my all new series, Cinematic Confessions, where I talk about films that I feel are underrated or overrated, and why that's the case, at least in my humble opinion. This will not be, however, your traditional fanboy crying or whining about, oh, such and such movie is overrated, the critics are stupid, or whatnot. This is going to be serious, straightforward, and no messing around. So, let's get to our first topic. And I can already feel one gentleman in the comments already smiling from ear to ear that I'm doing this. But I don't think it's for the reasons that he's quite thinking of. Batman Begins is certainly a very interesting film, to say the least, after the, less than adequate Batman and Robin. Warner Brothers put the series on ice for 7 years, no pun intended. And, throughout that time, a number of different directors and writers were attached until around 2004-2005, when David S. Goyer and Nolan, a young and up-and-coming director who had just made the hit films Memento and Insomnia, brought The Dark Knight back in a darker, more realistic vision that, on some level, was much closer to the original source material than the Tim Burton ones had ever been, although aesthetically it would take departures. And for the most part, the plan paid off. The film received great reviews and was a solid success at the box office, though nothing compared to its two successors, both of which went on to make over $1 billion apiece. Back when I originally saw the film when it came out, I was about, give or take, 13, 14 years old. And, I hated it. Mainly because the only Batman I had known up until that point was the Tim Burton films, Batman Forever, and Batman the Animated Series. And to me, this just didn't jive with me at the time, and I didn't really understand the concept of alternate interpretations. Nor was I that familiar with a number of the stories that this pulls from, such as Year One and a lot of the old Ra's al Ghul stories. However, before Dark Knight Rises came out, I decided to give the film another try, thinking that by this point I had taken the glasses off and I had opened up to Nolan's distinctive brand of filmmaking. Not to mention, Man of Steel was a year away, so I decided, hey, since another origin story is coming up from these two, let's see how this first attempt by them fared out. Needless to say, I warmed up to the film considerably more. But unfortunately, some of the problems from the first time unfortunately reared their ugly head yet again here. The main one being the dialogue. David S. Goyer, let it be known, has never been my favourite screenwriter. He's been involved in a number of worthwhile projects, but for the most part I've never found his dialogue to be all that appealing because of one simple problem. He has a horrible habit of overwriting it. What I mean by overwritten in this sense is that the characters often say things or deliver lines that are merely exposition, or say things that are there for the themes of the film rather than to serve them as characters or as believable people. In particular, Thomas Wayne feels like this. Though the actor does a perfectly fine job, unfortunately most of his dialogue is just setting up Bruce's moral philosophy. None of it really serves to make him an actual character, nor as a believable person that we can buy Bruce would really look up to. It often goads me a little bit when people praise how great the film is written, yet this is a very fundamental Writer's 101 mistake. Characters have to say things to further the narrative, that's kind of a no-duh, but it should be within the realms of the believable. The problem here is that every other line, Thomas Wayne is just espousing some moral lesson or the film's core theme, which is why do we fall to pick ourselves back up, which, frankly, I can't stand that line. It's used far too many times throughout the movie, and it feels like it needlessly hammers in its theme, even though the film by itself could handle that more than aptly in Nolan's hands. I'm not accusing Goyer of having no faith in his audience, but I just don't like the way this is put across. And furthermore, the overwriting extends into another problem, which is we don't really see what Thomas Wayne's contribution to Gotham is. Apart from pointing out that one building when he and Bruce are on the train, we don't get any real sense of what his influence or contribution to Gotham is. We're told it by other characters, but we never actually see any manifestation of it. Which only further cements the fact that, in my view, Thomas Wayne is more of a plot device than an actual person here, which is a real shame, because a huge part of Bruce's character is built on Thomas, and yet Thomas doesn't feel like he has an actual presence or anything really to contribute as far as humanity goes, and is only there to serve the film's themes. For me, this particular brand of dialogue didn't bug me as much in Man of Steel because it's science fiction. The dialogue there inherently necessitates a bit of, well, beefing up because it deals with a lot of very high concepts. But when you're trying to make a more gritty, realistic crime film, it doesn't really fit at all. For me, the films got better when Goya started having less and less input on the script, and it was more in the hands of the Nolan brothers, who brought a greater sense of realism and believability to the dialogue, and had their characters talk like human beings, instead of people who were just mouthpieces for the film's ideas. Not that every character in this film is like that, but it's really irritating when a huge part of the narrative and a character we are supposed to care about and who forms a big part of the life of our main protagonist is just that, a mouthpiece. Another big problem I have with the film is Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow. Now don't get me wrong, I think Cillian is a perfectly good young actor. And he's certainly proven himself in a number of other roles like Inception, and I felt he was actually pretty good in Dark Knight Rises for what little material he had. And I've heard he's meant to be really good in Breakfast on Pluto, but I haven't seen that yet. For me, the problem with this Scarecrow is that I just don't find him intimidating or menacing in the slightest, not even creepy, really. He just comes off more as a weird next-door neighbor basement-dwelling nerd more than anything else. In the comics and in other interpretations, Crane is a much older man who is obsessed with understanding what fear is and is willing to go to any lengths to understand it, even if it means causing harm and even death on a massive scale. On some level, Scarecrow very much represents the idea that even the educated, even doctors and whatnot, the wise older men of society, could be corrupted. And to me, that would have been a much more interesting idea in this particular film, given that we see how corruption affects the various parts of Gotham society, whether it be in the police, in government. Having Crane as an older man in this version would have been a perfect triumvirate of exploring how Gotham society has been corrupted, and that even the old and the wise, who are supposed to be the people that we look up to and trust in, can become as evil and corrupt as the criminals. And while some could argue that by having Cillian in the role it shows that the young can be corrupted easily, really we already see that in the form of the various street thugs that Batman fights throughout the film, as well as little hints here and there in news and whatnot about what kids are dealing with in Gotham. To me, someone like Robert Englund would have been perfect for this role, as he would have had both the age and the needed dramatic presence to make the role work and make him a worthwhile screen presence. And someone who we could buy as the villain of the film before, of course, Ra's makes his big return. Or Raish, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Furthermore, as far as making him scary when he's in the outfit, which is okay, I mean, granted, I would have preferred if he looked more like, say, the action figure where he had this really dirty, ripped-up straitjacket on him. I wish that they had constructed his appearances to be more suspenseful when he's in the costume, to actually create genuine fear and tension, as opposed to just him entering a room, putting the mask on, and then spraying the gas. And considering the film's grungy aesthetic in the second half, where a lot of it takes on a sickly yellow color, I think that would have really made for some great sequences, and certainly Nolan is more than capable of doing that. In fact, he managed to do that later in the film when the Scarecrow rides through Gotham on horseback looking a little bit like the Headless Horseman, which in all fairness was actually really well done. Kinda sad that he was defeated by an electric shock, but hey, at least we got a little bit of cool imagery right out of the comics there. But those are my major strifes against the film. There are of course a number of minor quibbles, but you've probably heard these before from even people who like the movie, such as the occasionally overly close-up action sequences, although there's really only one instance where this happens, and it's during a scene when Batman ambushes a bunch of thugs in a dock. Apart from that, actually most of the action isn't poorly shot. The battle in the League of Shadows is pretty decent and the camera is pulled back enough, and the Batmobile chase through Gotham is actually fairly well done. Nothing compared to what Nolan would do in Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, but for a first time, not bad. And of course Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes gets a lot of hate, although I don't mind her. She's not my first pick for the role, and next to Maggie Gyllenhaal from Dark Knight, she's not really much, but she did a passable enough job in the role. Nothing really offensive or poorly thought out. And hey, this was Nolan's first time doing a big film of this scale, so hey, there were going to be slip-ups at some point. Really, when all is said and done, I don't hate Batman Begins in spite of the reasons I listed beforehand. Sure, I may think it's overrated and it has its problems that I am often scratching my head as to why they're never addressed by other critics, but still, much like Bela Lugosi's Dracula from 1931, it's a film I respect more than I like, but it's not without its merits. As I said, the cast for the most part is pretty good. Special props going to the always awesome Liam Neeson, Morgan Freeman, and Michael Caine especially. James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer's score is suitably both exciting and actually kind of haunting and touching at points, and certainly stands out and contrasts nicely against the music that Elfman and Goldenthal made for the original 4 movies. And certainly the more realistic, grounded edge was refreshing, considering that at that point superhero films were starting to get a little bit too goofy, with Fantastic Four having hit the scene, and Ghost Rider and Fantastic Four 2, as well as Spider-Man 3 hitting the scene not long after the film's release. Even stuff that I didn't like at first, like the Tumblr, really has grown on me as the series has progressed and as I've gotten older and have refined my palate as both a film fan and a fan of the character, and as I've read more and more into the mythos. In the end, Batman Begins was a pretty decent building block for a new series, but I don't think it's this amazing film that it often gets made out to be. For me, this film gets a lot of slack cut for it because it came out after Batman and Robin. Then again, X-Men 3 looks good after Batman and Robin, so let that say what it will.